Good afternoon to you. 406 now, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. Coming up, Chuck Ross is going to join us at 5 o'clock from the Washington Free Beacon. He'll give us the latest information on these corruption charges against Democrat Senator Bob Menendez, a very powerful Democrat, finally being charged for influence peddling to enrich his family. And it's not Joe Biden. And then there's Brandon Judd. He is the head of the Border Patrol Union. He'll join us at 5:30 today. We'll talk about the border crisis and get a firsthand perspective from him. A lot of interesting information coming there. And we'll talk to you at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL.
It was a horrible sound.
That's a witness saying what he saw and heard as an F-35 crashed in South Carolina this past week. An $80 million jet by conservative estimates, $100 million by some of the more liberal estimates there, but a lot of money, and not a lot of answers on how that all went down. For more on this, I want to bring in Lt Col Tony Shaffer. He's the president of the London Center for Policy Research, and he's a CIA-trained former senior intelligence officer as well. Tony, good to have you with us, sir.
It's always great to be here with you. Thanks for having me.
It's amazing that something like this could even happen, isn't it? What was your reaction to hearing that such an important piece of our military arsenal just crashed and a pilot had to eject here in America?
Well, I'm not surprised because the F-35 has been problematic. And, you know, just recently, within the last 24 hours, more has come out just on the F-35 itself. And notably that this is probably the most expensive weapon system ever, Vince. I mean, we're spending, as you just said, a lot of money on it. Yet the availability rate, and these are combat aircraft supposed to be ready to go, are only 55%. That is to say, at any given time, you only have about half the aircraft ready to go for any number of technical problems. And when this one went down, the mystery of how they couldn't even find it to begin with, I mean, that on itself is just a problem. But then the problematic nature of the aircraft, and apparently these were the Marine version, which have they have to use special crayons to fly them. No, I'm kidding. That's a joke. I'm only joking about that. Don't get upset with me now. But the fact is that's a special aircraft that actually has the ability to land on the assault ships and take off.
Right. It's got vertical takeoff.
Vertical takeoff, right. So that's an order of magnitude more complex than a normal F-35. So
yes,
when it went down, I can't say I was all that surprised.
It's remarkable, and it comes as part of kind of a bad run for the Marine Corps because there was a Harrier crash recently in Australia, not a Harrier, excuse me, an Osprey crash in Australia recently that resulted in the deaths of 3 Marines. Which may explain, I think, why the Marine Corps issued a stand-down order for all aviation after the crash of this F-35. Too many mishaps like this in a row, including ones that had fatal consequences.
Right. And in particular, though, the F-35, I think, really became the focus of that stand-down. The other issue that a lot of people were worried about is that the amount of code that has to go into these sort of things. Now, I'm a big fan of the A-10, and they want to use the F-35 to replace it. They want to use this to replace the F-35 to replace the F-16. A whole bunch of weapon systems which are proven effective and still on the battlefield. My concern is, literally, Vince, if these F-35s aren't plugged into a computer to do a diagnosis which can be basically sent back to the manufacturer, it will shut down. That is to say that you could be in combat, and after a certain number of hours going by in use, if you don't allow it to basically phone home, it'll automatically shut down. I don't know how that's in the interest of anybody to have.
That's really how that system works? Really, you've got to put tokens in like it's an arcade game or something? I mean, what is that? This is supposed to be a jet that our guys are using. Why would we even agree to something like that?
Because of politics. One of the reasons this thing has been so vaunted in the defense circles is because Congress has ensured that all the major districts of interest, big donors, get a chunk of the manufacturing.
That's
so this
for sure.
Is and so this thing is built literally not even here. This is built internationally. some of the components come from overseas. So
yeah, people don't realize, I think, Tony, the extent to which what you just said is true about so much military equipment. So what happens is these giant defense contractors, the reason they have all of these lawmakers in their pocket and they get so much, uniform agreement among them is because they will build small components in every district in the country. They'll spread out all of basically, they'll spread the wealth around, to borrow an old phrase from Obama. And that results in these lawmakers not really giving the critique to these companies that they probably should. Right.
So Brigadier General Blaine Holt, one of my dear friends and colleagues, and I were on Newsmax the other day talking about this. We have an airframe that's very effective, the F-22. It's all U.S. made, highly effective. It could be adopted to a lot of the roles they're talking about. They ended the project run just so they could switch over to this international, multifaceted, built all over the place with no real focus on how it's going to function in combat. We abandoned that air system, the F-22, for purposes of this. I think this is a version of woke military, where you're more concerned about divvying out the money than you are creating a combat system that is going to be effective to achieve military objectives. It's a very dangerous thing, and I think we're seeing some of this play out now. Yeah. I'm looking at an old report here, by the way, to confirm what you and I are talking about. Business Insider, every U.S. state but for Alaska, Hawaii, Nebraska, and Wyoming, just 4 states. Every single U.S. state except for those 4 states has economic ties to the F-35, with 18 of those states counting on the project for $100 million or more in economic activity. And this is a report. This report, by the way, is a decade old. So my guess is some of those other states that were left out or may even be a part of it now. So that takes you inside the behind the scenes of how these deals get done and why they are preserved forever. Yep. And that's the danger. We have focused so much on appeasing the political winds of Washington rather than going to the drawing board and effectively creating those things necessary to defend the country. And Vince, this is not going to be fixed anytime soon. We're now facing off against China. We have other nations that are challenging our ability to conduct commerce. And you don't want an F-35 to be on the front line with the very fact of what we're seeing now. And I know the Air Force is trying to go back. They've got the F-15EX that they've developed. They're trying to get some of those into service, basically updating the F-15, which is a very effective, highly dangerous platform for the bad guys, not the good guys. And that's the thing. The F-35 is dangerous, but not to the right people, Vince, and that's what we have to focus on. That's disheartening to hear. I'm going to play some audio for you. This is the balance of the 911 call. I played a little bit of it a moment ago, but this is the pilot getting on the phone after landing in a civilian's backyard in Charleston, South Carolina, placing a 911 phone call and telling the 911 operator he's a military pilot and he needs we need to get a search crew going immediately to find this jet.
We have a military jet crash. I'm the pilot. We need to get rescue rolling. I'm not sure where the airplane is. It would have crash landed somewhere. I ejected.
Isn't it remarkable to even hear a call like that? I mean, this guy, he has to run into this house. It's like something out of a movie. He had to make a 911 call from some random guy's home. Well, they could make it a better aircraft, I guess, because that first observer said it was a big plane. Maybe they could install a rotisserie so at least they could cook some birds or chicken or something when it crashes, get some other use out of it, for goodness sake. But yeah, look, it is out of a movie, a bad movie, and one that I don't think Hollywood would even film because it would be too incredible. The Associated Press reports today that there are plenty of questions about the crash, notably why the plane wasn't tracked as it continued flying over South Carolina, and how it could take more than a day to find a massive fighter jet that had flown over populated, although rural areas. The Marines said that features that erase a jet's secure communications in case of an ejection, a feature designed to protect both the pilot's location and the plane's classified systems, may have also complicated the efforts to find it. So kind of that Mission Impossible outcome, which is that this message will self-destruct. Everything, apparently, including the tracking, was broken on this thing, and we were unable to find our stealth airplane for a while. Well, these things are actually flown domestically with reflectors on them, Vince. So, I think
you're right, and I think they're saying the correct thing, that this thing kind of self-destructs electronically, but it's designed to be seen while flying in domestic airspace. You can't have a stealth aircraft flying around bumping into commercial aircraft. So what I find fascinating is that they couldn't track it. And that, again, opens a whole nother door of issues that we need to examine. How can you not track something that size, even in that part of the country? It does open up Pandora's box here for asking some hard questions.
You've got to imagine that there are people at the FAA going, what? How does a plane escape our notice? And not just the FAA, but any company or airline who uses the skies is going to want to know that there is no traffic in their way as they move their planes through them.
Right. And so the answer is somebody who should have been tracking this thing down wherever it was going should have immediately tried to focus on that. And again, these things are flying around that area. There's a lot of aircraft flying around down there. That's not Charleston is not a rural area. Some of the area around it perhaps, but again, you should have very effective radar tracking this thing wherever it goes.
What role does leadership in the military play in this saga?
I think ultimately most of the problems we're seeing are from failed leadership, Vince. You can have the best technology, the best weapon systems, and complete idiots in charge, and you're going to fail. I mean, during World War II, there was a whole series of firings at the beginning of the war because they had to get rid of the incompetent, politically correct officers to win that war. And we don't have a Stormin Norman Schwarzkopf or a Joe Dufford, talked about Joe before, who's willing to go in and say, look, these are the things that are wrong. You must fix them. Most officers, like Mark Milley, the new chairman of the Joint Chiefs, did not get a good vote. 11 votes against him because there's a perception he's politically correct. Political correctness, focusing on how we can divest and ensure equity both in how we build things and who you sleep with as a determinant factor of your effectiveness in combat, is a very dangerous thing.
It's amazing. Tony Shaffer, before we let you go, I know you have an event coming up that you wanted to share some information about. Tell us, what is it?
Yeah, real quick, the Patriot Potluck Bonfire, a week from Saturday. It's at Chris and Debbie Cloud's place out in Fauquier County. You can call to RSVP 571-451-9112, 571-451-9122. I'm sorry, 9112. Don't get that wrong. And what I'm talking about today, I'll be talking about in a lot more detail, kind of going through a national security brief to the folks. The last one we did in January was highly attended. I think people would enjoy it, so I hope they come out and hope to see you there.
Okay, awesome. And let me verify as I open all this up. It looks like, yes, there is a website. If you just go to a search engine, you type in Patriot Potluck Bonfire, you will find it as the top result. Patriot Potluck Bonfire. Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer, thank you very much. Always good to talk to you, sir. Joe Biden is having a lot of trouble given his advanced age and senility. Earlier this week, he was at a campaign event in Manhattan, of course, raising money. And while he was there, they say he told a story and then moments later told the same exact story again, as if he had never told the story in the first place. The New York Post says, during remarks at the gathering hosted by billionaire real estate heiress Amy Goldman Fowler, the 80-year-old president recounted how he was enjoying retirement after 2 terms as Barack Obama's vice president, when along came in August of 2017, Charlottesville, Virginia. Quote, you remember those folks walking out of the fields, literally carrying torches with Nazi swastikas, holding them forward, singing the same vicious anti-Semitic bile, the same exact bile that was sung in Germany in the early 30s, and a young woman was killed. A young woman was killed. And then he says, that's when I decided I was going to run again. After the president recounted how his extended family urged him to challenge Trump, he then began to tell the story again. Quote, you may remember that, those folks from Charlottesville as they came out of the fields and carrying those swastikas, and remember the ones with the torches and the coup accompanied by the Ku Klux Klan. And in addition to that, there were white supremacists. Anyway, they were making the big case about how terrible this was, and a young woman was killed in the process. And so I couldn't, quite frankly, remain silent any longer, Biden concluded. So I decided I would run. Okay, he's told the story twice in a row, back to back. Now, that is a product of whatever shortcomings his brain is now encountering given his health and his age. So today, Peter Doocy asked Corinne to explain this. The answer, the truth, is what I just told you. Let's hear what Corinne tells you.
At a fundraiser this week, President Biden told donors about how Charlottesville inspired his campaign, and then according to the pool, a few minutes later, he told the story again nearly word for word. What's up with that?
What I can tell you is, and I'm going to be careful not to talk about, because this was a campaign event for this upcoming campaign, obviously in 2024, so I'm not going to speak to that, put that out there for the Hatch Act. What I can speak to is...
is that how that works, by the way? If you add a little legal, if you say something like that, I'm not violating the Hatch Act, then you don't violate the Hatch Act? Is that how... This is like Michael Scott yelling, "I declare bankruptcy" in the middle of the office. I don't think it actually works that way.
To speak to that, put that out there for the Hatch Act. What I can speak to is, look, the president was making very clear why he decided to run in 2019. He made it very clear as to what he saw in this country and what was going on.
He just wanted to make it very clear. So clear that in case anybody in the room had missed it, including himself, he would say it again. I just wanted to be super clear about it. You know, this may be a deep cut, but it reminds me, there's a movie that I love called My Blue Heaven. Steve Martin is an Italian mobster who's in the witness protection program. They move him to some small town somewhere else in the country. And as soon as he gets there, he starts a crime wave. He's like stealing all sorts of stuff. And the local prosecutor says, "Why do you have 25 copies of the same book in your trunk?" And he stares at her for a moment and he goes, "In case I want to read it more than once." Because this is why Biden tells the story twice, you know, just to be clear, just in case you missed it the first time. You deserve to hear the whole thing. So that's Joe. That's really good. That's an amazing explanation for that. Joe Biden, word for word, told the same exact story. And still wondering why there was no audience reaction either time. Old Uncle Joe. Boy, he shouldn't be president. 429. Hey, good afternoon to you. Make this 4:35 now. News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, Chuck Ross will join us at the top of the hour. We'll get the latest on the criminal indictment into Democrat Senator Bob Menendez, charged yet again with corruption by the federal government. What a story. It involves cash stuffed into the pockets of his clothing and his wife's clothing at home, gold bars stacked up at the house, a brand new Mercedes, payments being made by the people bribing him in order to subvert the United States. This story has something for everyone, really. That's what I'm trying to say. And Chuck Ross will lay it all out coming up. And why now? Why now of all times? I'm sure lots of you have that question. We'll explore. And also joining us at 5:30, Brandon Judd will be here. He's the head of the Border Patrol Union. And boy, do they have their work cut out for them as they try and create some semblance of a border in our country. We'll talk to him at 5:30, and we'll chat with you at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. I want to bring you to a story out of Boston University this week, and it involves a guy who goes by the name, it's a fake name, but he goes by the name Ibram X. Kendi. Ibram X. Kendi. You may remember him because he is this kind of like phony pseudo-intellectual that corporate America decided to spend a lot of money on to convince everyone that they are racist and that they need to go through a struggle session about their racism, which is everywhere, and that there's no escaping it, you're a racist. That's basic. That's the whole summary. And Ibram Kendi writes books for adults and for children. He wants everybody to spread the bad news, that racism is everywhere and that you're it. Okay? In fact, one of his most famous quotes that he has since edited out in classic Orwellian fashion of the digital edition of his book is, quote, and the book is called How to Be an Anti-Racist. How to Be an Anti-Racist. And those words don't mean, by the way, how to stop being prejudiced, in case you thought they were. Quote, the only remedy to racist discrimination is anti-racist discrimination, he says. The only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination, he says. The only remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination, he concludes. So we have no choice but to discriminate, is what Ibram X. Kendi says. Now, his real name, in case you were wondering, is Henry Rodgers. That is his real name. Not to be confused with the great Henry Rodgers, political correspondent for the Daily Caller. I believe their names are spelled slightly differently. But my buddy Henry is the better of the two Henry Rodgers. But this guy, Henry Rodgers, is a racist. He dresses it up in the language of, quote, anti-racism, but he says it out loud. What he wants is prejudice in the United States of America. And so in 2020, in the midst of the George Floyd riots, Ibram Kendi, Henry Rodgers, became a celebrity very quickly, and he became a very wealthy one at that. Corporations went crazy for this guy, and they gave him a ton of money. At the same time, they were giving a ton of cash to Black Lives Matter. Do you remember that? The movement that destroyed so many of America's cities and were constantly attacking police headquarters and hurting cops over and over. Corporate America funded all of that. And then what did those organizations do? Well, in the case of Black Lives Matter, the national organization, they stole the money. They turned around and used it to buy mansions, right? What did BLM stand for? Buy large mansions. That's what it ended up being. Not my idea. It's somebody else's line, but it's a good one. Buy large mansions. They bought a bunch of them, not just here in the United States. They bought them in Canada, too. And then eventually, all of the, quote, chapters of Black Lives Matter turned around and go, what are you doing with all this money? I thought we were supposed to get some of this cash. Where is it? Sorry, we spent it on the mansions and on our lifestyles. None for you. They would go on to complain about their 501c3 status, which means they're a tax-exempt organization, which means that you, as an American taxpayer, are entitled to see what kind of money they're receiving and what kind of money they're spending. And their founders, this woman, Patrisse Cullors, she was on tape saying, this is awful. She's so scared of the scrutiny. It keeps her up at night, that people can see the finances of a tax-exempt organization. Why would it keep you up at night? Why would you be scared of that kind of scrutiny? So back to Ibram Kendi. Boston University, a couple years back, 2020, in the midst of the George Floyd riots, launched a center that they called the Center for Anti-Racist Research. The Center for Anti-Racist Research, to be led by Ibram X. Kendi, also known as Henry Rodgers. Boston University hires him to run the center. And over the course of the last 3 years, you want to know how much money they pulled in from corporations? $43 million. They made $43 million in grants and gifts. Those grants came from organizations like, first, former Twitter co-founder Jack Dorsey gave $10 million. $10 million, that's a lot of money. There's other donors that include TJ Maxx's foundation, the clothing store, Stop and Shop, as well as Peloton, the stationary bicycle with a television screen. Peloton. They were giving money to this Center for Anti-Racist Research. And now, 3 years later, they have laid off almost all of their staff at this organization that took in $43 million. Multiple former staff members alleged that there was a mismanagement of funds, shocker, high turnover rate, shocker, and general disorganization have plagued the center since its inception. This is the reporting of the Daily Free Press, which is the independent student newspaper at Boston University. So now Boston University announced this week that they're launching and expanding an inquiry into all of this. What the heck happened? Now, they're not distancing themselves from Kendi yet, Henry Rodgers. They're still acting as if he's a part of getting to the bottom of this. But the reality is, with all of that money, they have nothing to show for it except division, except people fighting each other inside of the office. In fact, they claim that this article says that there were multiple high-level employees who were a part of this operation who have left suddenly, and they allege that the workplace culture included, you ready? A fear of retaliation and discrimination. A fear of retaliation and discrimination. Really? I thought this was the group that was supposed to get rid of discrimination. No. Remember, Vince, what you said a moment ago. The answer to past discrimination is current discrimination. The answer to current discrimination is future discrimination. So an organization whose sole purpose is to advance prejudice, discrimination, to sow division, to create chaos. Guess what happened inside of the, quote, can you call it an organization if it's this disorganized? It fell apart. Their whole idea for the country was to introduce all sorts of ideas that would divide us and make everything fall apart. They didn't even get that far. They fell apart, the whole thing. And we still don't know. You can go through all the reporting. I still don't know what they spent $43 million on. I read through this whole thing. It's an excellent reported piece, thousands of words long. No accounting for where the $43 million went. Nothing. Look, if I was going to blow through $43 million, you would at least see the back of my yacht as I was drifting away. There'd be some evidence of it. Here, there's nothing. It's just like, they blew through $43 million. They're losing donors because they're not seeing any signs that they're doing anything. And everybody's fighting with one another. And there's a culture of fear inside of this organization. Who would have thunk? Who would have thunk that this would be the outcome of all of this? It is as predictable as the sunrise, isn't it? That something like this would occur. And it's happened over and over and over again. It happened with the Black Lives Matter organization. It's happening here. Just stolen money from decent people who, like, first of all, on the individual grassroots level, people who thought in 2020 that they were giving money to some sort of organization. I don't want all this fighting. I don't want all this chaos. I just want things to be good. If I just give them money, maybe it'll work. Nope, sorry, your money got stolen. Your money got stolen. And then these corporations, they're doing it because they don't want to be hurt. They were paying the ransom. They're like, look, if I just give you money, will you not accuse me of being racist, please? Will you please? And so they did, to the tune of $43 million. And they burned through all of it with nothing to show for it, except for all of this chaos and division. Now, one of the things that the center at Boston University, the Center for Anti-Racism Research, was supposed to do was research. It's in the name, right? They were supposed to produce data for public consumption to help us fix racism in the country, to advance, quote, equity, which is another way of saying racial discrimination. And yet, all these years later, what have they produced? Basically nothing. They had, the little data they had was something called the COVID Racial Data Tracker. They launched that in 2020. They abandoned it in March of 2021. And that's all they have to show for it. Now, I'll tell you why, by the way, in case you're wondering. I know it instinctively. Early in the pandemic, there were more black people dying due to COVID, very, very early in the pandemic, for I think it was a single month or so. And that may have had to do with population density in certain black neighborhoods, that COVID was hitting those neighborhoods at that moment, and it resulted in higher rates of black death. And it's very unfortunate, of course. But then the numbers began evening out after that, and the media never went back to actually explain that the per capita death rate had evened out dramatically, that people of all races were dying at similar levels. It was more tracking on obesity than anything else. Obesity and age were the indicators, not race. And so by March of 2021, that's abundantly clear. If you're trying to create some sort of racial structure out of the COVID data and use it to suggest that black people are getting hit harder, by March of 2021, the data aren't bearing that out. So they stopped following it. They stopped producing the data. So this is not an organization dedicated to facts and trying to, bring us good news when it arrives. They were like, nah, we're just going to give up on this. So March of 2021, they're done with it. And then they produce nothing else. If you want to produce data that helps people on the basis of their race, boy, there's a lot you could do, isn't there? There's a lot you can do. The left, especially in 2020, they made a big deal out of, well, police are killing black people everywhere. Unarmed black people are being killed in the streets by cops, right? That was the claim, that there was a genocide going on. So a normal person, what would a normal person do when given that argument? Well, a normal person would say, okay, let's look at the data. Let's see what the validity is there. And especially if you start looking at data, then you can start figuring out solutions, right? The underlying data. And what was the underlying data? Oh, it turns out it was garbage. It was total garbage. If you go back to years like 2019, which of course would be the year of reference in 2020, there were just, I'm remembering from the top of my head, it's somewhere between a dozen and 20 black Americans, I'm not kidding, who were killed unarmed by police. And the circumstances for those deaths were, you could drill down, there's only 20. You could drill down to each individual story and figure out what happened, whether it was, you know, a mistaken situation where they thought the guy had a gun or the guy was actually still a physical threat to somebody despite the fact that he was unarmed, but whatever. In other words, even if you were to say that all 20 were unjust homicides, 20. Meanwhile, we had upwards of something like 8,000 homicides of black men in America that year that had nothing to do with cops. So if you were looking at data specifically designed to help black Americans in this case, or any, for that matter, any color American, any race, you'd look at that and go, okay, what do we do? What is killing black people in America? Like what's the most likely reason that a black person will die due to homicide? Well, unfortunately, it's another black person, by and large. And a lot of this is gang activity. And we've got to do something about this. Like a society that was healthy would do that. An unhealthy society would give $45 million to a man whose real name is Henry Rodgers, pretending to be Ibram Kendi, and then telling people the only way forward is to discriminate against each other for the rest of eternity. That makes sense to you? You know, he was asked on stage a couple years ago, how do you define racism? He was asked, it's a very simple question. How do you define racism? And his answer amounted to something. He used the word racism in his explanation. If you ever talk to somebody and you ask them for a definition and they use the word in the definition, they're an idiot. The whole point of giving a definition is to be able to describe that word without using it again. That's circular. It doesn't actually define the word. So he said something like, racism is racist systems and racist institutions resulting in racist outcomes. That's not a definition of racism. That's just your worldview crammed into what the rest of us used to have a very different definition for a word that the rest of us had a very different definition for. In other words, racism, to me and you, is judging people on the basis of an immutable characteristic, their skin color. You shouldn't do that. You shouldn't come to a snap decision about somebody and who they are on the basis of their skin color. And yet, guess who does that? Oh, that's Ibram freaking Kendi. And he just burned through $45 million for nothing. So in case you wanted an update on that stupid saga, you got one. Because Boston University, the student newspaper, God bless them, they dug in on this and they're saying, this is chaos. Nobody knows what happened to all this money. And now I'm starting to see some other news outlets pick this up. Good. This deserves a follow-up, and I'm glad to see it's getting one. It's 450 now. You know, at the center of that Ibram Kendi guy's ideology, it's all Marxism all the way up and down. You can listen to some videos of him, and it's all just Marxism, fundamentally. I had a friend a couple years back, in the midst of 2020 actually, who she had read that Robin DiAngelo book, White Fragility. It is equally as stupid, but lots of Americans read it and they took it to heart. She's not white at all, but she kind of believed it. She's like, "Oh, am I racist? Maybe I'm racist." I sent her a bunch of research, you know, and articles. Matt Taibbi, John McWhorter, the linguist from Columbia, just ripping the book limb from limb. And she came back and she was like, "You know what? Thank you so much. I feel like an idiot for adopting that." But I get it. Look, these people try and exploit your decency in order to bring you to very cynical and destructive points of view, and it's awful. It is awful, and it turns out, you know, they're just as bad at destroying. They can't produce things; they destroy them, which is why you just saw Kendi blow through $43 million at Boston University. Let me take Dan in Bethesda here, line 2. Dan, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, Vince. I wanted to let you know that specifically the Montgomery County School Board bought almost $1 million worth of books from Kendi, from his publisher,
right,
for the CRT books, and gave them to the teachers. I know this for a fact because my wife was a teacher. at the time. So
yeah.
I won't even tell you what she did with her book, but that's okay. I don't want to get her in trouble.
You're allowed to. Yeah, you're allowed to put a book in the garbage if it's garbage, and it's that one certainly is. You know, and it's not just Montgomery County. You remember Fairfax County? They had a similar thing. Not that much money though, but Fairfax County, I think they spent somewhere in the vicinity of $20,000 to have this guy give everybody a lecture about how they're racists. It's what a privilege, huh? What a privilege. That this guy makes bank, produces nothing, and then tells people they suck. That's quite a saga. All right, coming up, we're going to be joined by Chuck Ross, just moments away from the Washington Free Beacon, as we get into Bob Menendez's corruption. He's been charged by the federal government now. And we'll have Brandon Judd join us. He's the president of the Border Patrol Council. It's ahead on the Vince Coglianese Show.